So, here we are. The first season of Amazon Prime's highly anticipated mega-budget Lord of the Rings series, The Rings of Power, is in the books, and we are living in 2022, which means there are already a bunch of reviews, commentaries, reactions, fan theories and video essays out there, so I figured, what the hell? The show has been called anything from being a masterpiece to a failure, epic to disastrous, and there seems to be a divided fanbase. To be honest, there aren't too many masterpiece opinions out there, but quite many disaster ones. However, that's exactly where you're wrong, or to put it in a less provoking way, where I strongly disagree. Now, don't get me wrong, I do not argue that the show is a masterpiece, so don't worry about that. Instead, I claim that both sides, lovers and haters, are wrong. But from the start. In November 2017, Amazon bought the television rights for The Lord of the Rings. In July 2018, they hired J.D. Payne and Patrick McKay as the new David Benioff and D.B. Weiss, and are praying since then that the former wouldn't screw things up as badly as the latter did with their big budget fantasy installment. So far so good. Long before the first frame of the series popped up on our screens, it was announced that the show is going to get 5 seasons and a total budget of at least $1 billion. That's right, $1 billion, making it the most expensive TV show ever made. Despite the massive budget and seemingly unlimited resources provided by Mr. Jeff Bezos, the show already caused both impatient anticipation as well as unsettling concerns. But why? Well, on the one side, it is the opportunity for an epic fantasy saga for the new Game of Thrones, but on the other side, it is the opportunity for the new Game of Thrones. To be more precise, there is hardly a fanbase out there that is less unforgiving to its beloved story world than the one of The Lord of the Rings. People complain about the initial 3 movies, despite being nominated for 30 Oscars and taking home 17 of them. Still, even the most critical fan would have to admit that this trilogy set its own landmark in movie history. However, a couple of years later, Hollywood decided to do it all over again and make a Hobbit trilogy as well. Now, one could argue about the necessity and artistic value of these films, but that would make for a video on its own. But I think we can all agree on the fact that The Hobbit does not even come close to the impact and level of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So, as The Rings of Power was announced, many fans, including myself, were skeptical. An understandable reaction, since we are very protective of the stories of Middle-earth, simply because they are so brilliant. Think about it, nobody would be worried if they made a sequel to The Room.
I did not hit her. It's not true. It's bullshit. I did not hit her. I did not. Oh, hi, Mark.
There is no harm in trying, but with a world like the one created by J.R.R. Tolkien, the stakes are high. Nobody wants this franchise to become the next Star Wars. Producers and writers were warned and decided not to touch the characters from the original stories, but make the show a prequel that takes place during the second age of Middle-earth. Alright. Speaking of not touching the original characters, the show starts off by introducing one of our protagonists, Galadriel. Yeah, that worked out great. Something told me that she and Elrond would still be there by the end of season 1. Other important characters in the show are Elenor, Poppy, the Meteor Man, Arondir, Bronwyn, Theo, Halbrand, Miriel, Elendil, his son Isildur, Oren, Durin, and his wife Disa, to name a few. And that's where the first problem lies. The show simply has too many characters to be a fast-paced, plot-driven fantasy saga, which is one of the reasons why The Rings of Power is not a masterpiece. What do you mean by that? Let me elaborate a bit on that. One of the main complaints the audience continuously keeps bringing up is the statement, the book was better than the show or film, and this simply is not a valid argument. It is like saying that you liked your vacation trip more than the sandwich you had for lunch. It doesn't make sense because they are two completely different things. The reason why many fans prefer the books over the movies is the fact that because there, they fleshed out the characters more, featured their motivations and backstories, which ultimately led to a better understanding of the story. I get it, but one key step in the process of adaptation is to cut it down. Let me give you an example. If you want to turn a, let's say, 500-page book into a 2-hour movie, you will need to cut out quite a lot of the original story. A 2-hour film usually starts with a screenplay of roughly 120 pages, and there are certain plot points you have to hit. Even if we ignore the different formatting styles for the sake of simplification, that means that 380 pages are already gone. And it makes sense, because nobody minds reading a novel over the time span of a couple of days, if not weeks, but who would watch an 8-hour movie in theaters in one go? This is why you cannot include every chapter from the book, which is not necessarily meant to be consumed at once, in the movie, which is required to be watched within 2 hours. Now, you might say, why are you talking about adaptation at all if The Rings of Power is only loosely based upon Tolkien's work? Good question. In order to see why The Rings of Power is no disaster or failure, it is important to understand the core problem of adaptation. As I just said, nobody would watch an 8-hour movie in one go, but people are willing to watch a story that takes 8 hours. That's why TV shows became that popular over the last couple of years. How does this connect to my argument though? The second major problem with Amazon's mega-budget show is its slow pacing. There are quite a lot of scenes where people are just talking, solving personal conflicts, or just having a moment with some orchestral music underneath. Now, these moments are valuable over the long run because they do exactly what a book does, adding depth to the characters and their relationships with one another. Unfortunately though, it is not as simple. When we read a novel, we are used to coming across some chapters that are less exciting than others, but we will not complain about this since we know from experience that the slower parts of the story that focus on the characters are set up for a rewarding arc or development later on. However, watching a show or movie, these rules do not apply in the same way. When we watch a visual story, we have different expectations and are looking for some sort of cinematic spectacle, especially in the fantasy genre. This means that you cannot simply adapt a book into a film or show without running the risk of creating a slow-paced product that might even bore the audience. One recent example of this would be Denis Villeneuve's science fiction film Dune. It is, without question, a very good movie, but due to the fact that they only covered the first half of the book, the first act of the film takes over an hour, and that is quite long. Coming back to the Lord of the Rings series, we face a similar problem. While other TV shows such as Stranger Things also consist of multiple seasons, each season still works as a story on its own and hits the anticipated plot points, meaning that the first 2 to 3 episodes usually provide some exposition and introduce new characters before the story accelerates and ultimately results in an action-packed and/or emotional climax. And that is what The Rings of Power does not do. Even though the stakes do get higher over the first season and the plot speeds up a bit, the overall feeling remains that of watching or reading a first act. The showrunners knew that they would tell a 5-season story, so they simply took the first 20% of it and turned it into season 1. It is the same approach that was used for Dune, but while Dune does speed up a lot after the midpoint, this show hardly does and therefore is not as fun to watch as other shows that do follow a 3-act structure in every of their seasons. To give a simple example, let's briefly compare the latest Stranger Things season to this one on a structural level. In the Netflix original, the characters are once more divided into their separate plotlines, pursuing their individual goals and do not interact with other characters outside their groups. The same is true for the Prime original, as Eleanor is taking care of the Meteor Man, Elrond is trying to convince the Durins of saving his people, Arondir and Bronwyn fighting against the Orcs, and Galadriel convincing Miriel that the war is not over yet. However, while Stranger Things manages to unite more and more characters towards the end of the season, The Rings of Power hardly does, and many of the characters do not even know of each other's existence. So, the show faces the problems of having too many characters and being too slow. Two issues that are obviously connected and could have been solved by either adding 2 more episodes to season 1 and by that providing more character time while not having to sacrifice a fast-paced plot, or simply reducing the amount of characters. This would not mean that we have to give up on them entirely, but especially those who do not play an imminent role in the plot could have been introduced later on in the story, for example in season 2. I assume that even the minor characters of season 1 like Arianne, Pharazôn, Gil-galad or Celebrimbor will become important later on, and I do understand the showrunner's motivation to already establish those in order to save exposition time for the upcoming seasons. But from a practical standpoint this will hardly work, since it will take a whole year until season 2 will be released, and most of us will already have forgotten these minor characters by then anyway. But let's see, maybe they will prove me wrong. The third and last reason why The Rings of Power is not a masterpiece is its lack of soul. Now, what is that supposed to mean again? What I mean, and where I think many of you will agree with me, is the fact that the show does not even come close to the charm and impact of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. The reason for that is not the budget, of course. Money is not the issue here. Or is it? To me, and maybe this is just me, the show gave me the impression of putting financial success first. This impression already started in 2017 when Amazon announced the project, and I immediately thought that they want to create the next Game of Thrones with it. Of course, it seems logical. People love Game of Thrones, people love fantasy, people love The Lord of the Rings, so if you consider these factors and combine them into a $1 billion series, it should be an automatic success. But that is not how creativity works. It is not like math. There is another ingredient to it, and that ingredient is magic. Not the magic Gandalf or Saruman could do, but the magic of an original creative story, the magic that Peter Jackson's trilogy has. By trying to play by the numbers and please everyone, you might up pleasing nobody because it is too much of a formula story. If you think of the big TV show hits of the last couple of years, Breaking Bad, Game of Thrones, Stranger Things, or even Squid Game, none of these shows simply ripped off another idea and became the next big thing. They all were original ideas told by creative minds. Of course, all of them had their inspirations, but they created something new, something good, something magical. Now, not all of them finished as strong as they started, but none of them started in a mediocre way. And that's where they differ from the Rings of Power. With the idea of recreating the success of Game of Thrones or The Lord of the Rings and giving the show a massive budget, they stopped any magic from the start. However, while this is the third reason why the show is no masterpiece, in fact not even close to it, it is also the first reason why the show is no failure or disaster. Admittedly, perhaps it wasn't the smartest idea by Prime to announce the budget right away. If you go to a restaurant and the soup already costs $30, what will happen? Well, first of all, you probably won't order a steak for dinner, and second, your expectations will grow. I think that is exactly what happened with the Lord of the Rings series and why so many people apparently hate it. With a budget of roughly $200 million for 8 episodes and Tolkien's name hanging over the entire project, people simply became unrealistic in what to expect. Is the show a masterpiece? No, it's not. But does that automatically make it a failure? No, of course not. If we pretend for a second that this show has nothing to do with The Lord of the Rings, we would probably come to the conclusion that it's not that bad. Actually, it might even be pretty good. The writing is solid, the story world looks amazing. Cinematography, VFX, set design, costumes, coloring, sound design, all top of the line. The cast does a good job, the fight choreos were well planned and executed. Overall, all the technical aspects were flawless, and still, something is missing, something that makes the show stand out from all the other shows. You can call it magic, you can call it unique selling point, but in the end, after having watched all 8 episodes and to be honest enjoyed most of them, I still couldn't hear the show's voice. The Rings of Power is by no means a bad show. Objectively speaking, it is way above average and does not do a lot of things wrong. It actually does have the potential of becoming a great show, but for that, the creators and producers behind the project have to take more risks. Stop trying to please everyone and solely focus on the story and not think about the financial success. Easier said than done, but necessary in order to reach the show's full potential. I'm excited for season 2 and more stories from Middle-earth. Thank you for watching and I will see you in the next video. Bye!